Hi everyone! So I want to make another video today about authenticity, but as it relates, I guess authenticity and vulnerability as it relates to community creation. Because actually, this is a great example. I have just been sitting here, I had this thought on my run of like, I should make this video that people need to be talking about this more, and I was thinking about it a lot yesterday. And then I was just sitting here for like a couple of minutes, like, well, like, who am I to talk about this? I shouldn't, like, I'm not an expert in anything, And I was like, this is exactly what I wanted to talk about. So I've gotten a lot of inspiration lately from listening to really authentic, brave women. And that is not to say that men can't be authentic and brave as well. I think anyone can be authentic and brave. It just coincidentally happens to have been what I've been listening to lately. So cannot recommend it enough if you haven't listened to it. We Can Do Hard Things by Glennon and her sister. Amazing podcast. Absolutely amazing. And the second one I just listened to this morning is Oprah's podcast. I have already forgotten the name, so I will look it up. But she's interviewing Dr. Brene Brown, and Super Soul by Oprah. I hadn't listened to it before this morning, but I wanted to listen to something more about Brene Brown because I feel like she has a lot of things to say and well-researched things that are like phenomenal, just absolutely phenomenal. And I was listening to, she does a 2-part episode with Oprah. I was listening to the first part on my run this morning, and then I came back, listened to the second part, and just so many truth bombs in there. And sort of the commonality in all of these things that I've taken in recently and listened to is that it's a truth that I know to be true already. And I keep hearing it from all these different places. I'm like, well, I want to talk about this as well. And I will shout it from the rooftops until everyone is talking about it and it becomes a more like normal thing to talk about, because it's been my experience growing up in America and being part of the millennial generation, which I hate even saying because I feel like our generation has gotten this like negative like connotation. Like hearing the word millennial, everyone's like, oh, gross, God, like what next? I'm like, I feel personally attacked. I feel very attacked by that, and I feel like why? What have we done that's so distasteful and disgusting to everyone? I think it's weird, but regardless, I think my generation is. I mean, every generation is unique, but what I've noticed in my generation specifically is that we have had to go through this process. Many of us, of course, not everyone. I don't think it's ever, safe or appropriate to make these generalizations. But what I've noticed a lot in my personal circles, within my generation, as I said, is that we have had to go through this amazing, incredible, difficult, painful process of unlearning a lot of stuff. And one of the biggest things is that I feel like a lot of us were raised to believe that vulnerability is a weakness. Not being perfect is a weakness. If you are, let's say, you're at your job and something doesn't go well, you make a mistake, you are weak, you are that weakness, you're a mess. You definitely can't like tell people about it. Don't tell people that you've made a mistake or that you're not doing well or that you need help. And what I've noticed, the result of that, the consequence of that, is that people feel like shit about themselves. We feel isolated and alone, unheard, unseen, unloved, unworthy. And you can follow that path down even further, and it goes to really dark places. And I've lost a lot of friends to suicide. And I really strongly believe that some of these elements were present in that journey. I know they were for me, and I've experienced, as I mentioned before, suicidal depression. And one of the things that Dr. Brene Brown talked about in this podcast I listened to this morning, and this is from, I think, 2017, it's a while back now, is that she researched shame a lot, which I actually didn't know about her. It's just funny because like I've heard her name so frequently, and usually in these like quotes or like someone's read a book and they're reading a passage from it, just like these little like, tidbits of information about her, and I find her fascinating and amazing and empowering. But I've never read her books. I actually have ordered one. It's on the way. and I didn't know that much about like her specific areas of research. I didn't realize that like shame was such a big focus for her. And when I was running this morning, listening to this episode, and she was talking about it, I was like, was wildly enough, I was like, this probably won't apply to me at all. I don't shame, whatever. Not true. I think we all experience shame to different levels. But as these things relate, in my mind, and things that she talks about as well, and that Glennon and her sister and guests have talked about on her podcast, is that shame, or the perception of if I do this, shame will occur, prevents connection. Like it just completely shuts it off. It's not like, oh, maybe something, like it's, the doors are closed, slammed, locked, cemented over. Like that story of the guy, I don't remember who it is, like there's some old, I was gonna say Count of Monte Cristo, and that's absolutely not it, but I think it's an Italian story. I'm just making this up now, I have no idea. But he's like afraid to do this duel, so he goes and hides, but he pretends that he's not there because he's ashamed. This actually works, weirdly enough. And then they cement him in, and before the last brick is placed, he's like, oh, I'm in here, please don't like bury me alive, essentially. And his dad's like, you've dishonored our family, seal it up, which is a pretty depressing story, obviously. But like, it just, that's how I feel about it, and that's what I've noticed is, but it's so difficult. It's so difficult to unlearn. Like, what I have found is that the more vulnerable and authentic we can be, the stronger connections that we can form. And as Dr. Brene Brown put it in the podcast, she said, vulnerability is the only path to intimacy. And I have found that to be true as well. And in my personal and romantic relationships, when you have these, like, if you think about like awkward conversations of like, oh, I really want my partner to know that I have all these fears, but it is wildly terrifying to tell them that. And I actually experienced a moment of this a few months back, so I can like speak directly to this. When you're like, I am terrified, but instead of often like acknowledging that fear and being able to express it, like, hey, I'm really scared of these things, can we talk about it? Instead, what often happens is that we either suppress them, bury them, don't acknowledge them at all, and then they come out. They do, as Dr. Brene Brown puts it, metastasize. And she's also talking about creativity when she talks about that. But I like the word metastasize because I think it works very well for fears and shame in relation to being vulnerable and authentic. The need to be seen and heard is a deeply inherent human need. And when we suppress that, I think that metastasizes as well, these very deep needs that we have as human beings. And for me, and probably for many others, it plays out as acting outside of my values, acting in ways that I'm like, looking back, I'm like, why the fuck would I do that? Like, what am I doing? I am like destroying my personal relationships because I'm so afraid to be honest. And it sounds like so simple, like, well, yeah, just be honest. But obviously, many of us have experienced, like I said, for Americans in my generation, I think we were raised, a lot of us, in a culture of you have to put on a facade and be your best possible self at all times, which isn't real. Nobody is doing that in reality. Like, nobody is their best self at all times, is what I mean. We see this veneer of what people want us to see. And I think social media adds to that, of course. Absolutely. Like, it's the highlight reel, but when we see everyone's highlight reel, we assume, well, look at this person, their life is perfect, they never struggle, I am a failure because I am struggling. And we internalize that, and that creates shame, that then creates anger, and then we have to live with that. And then we show up in the world from that lens instead, and it's obviously not our best selves then. But to admit that we are struggling is really hard. And I have watched our generation, like, I literally got the chills just now, like, thinking about it, like, work to overcome that so hard, like, fight to be able to talk about depression, overwhelm, anxiety, stress as normal, rather than like, there is something wrong with you if you experience these things. If you are having a hard time, it is your fault. And that has been driven home, I think, by the American society that I grew up in. I can't really speak to it now because I've lived abroad for 4 years, but quite probably still going on. I think it probably happens in a lot of societies. It probably happens in the Czech Republic, and I just don't notice it because I'm not fluent in Czech, and I'm like kind of removed from society as an expat. But I think that we need to talk about these things, because when we are not vulnerable and authentic, when we don't share that we are having these same experiences, it isolates us and it reinforces the belief that we are alone in these experiences and in these feelings. And when I was listening to the most recent podcast on We Can Do Hard Things by Glennon Doyle and her sister, that was my biggest takeaway. Like I have literally wept. I'm not exaggerating, not just like cried. Like I was running down the street. I used to listen to podcasts when I run because I'm trying to slow myself down on purpose, as part of my training program to not get hurt. It's a conscious thing that I'm trying to do. And podcasts help me because music, I'm like, ooh, 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 pump it up, let's fucking run, let's sprint down the street. And it's not sustainable and it's not like a good thing to do. But I could make hours of videos on mistakes I've made while running. Learn from me, please. And maybe I will, but today is not that day. But what I have experienced listening to these is like literally like weeping running down the street. Like, oh my God, me too. And that is what we need to heal as a society, I think. And regardless of your generation, your age, your gender, anything about you, it's a deep human need to feel seen and heard and loved and worthy. And I think all these things tie into each other. When we feel seen, when we feel heard, when we feel loved, it helps us to feel worthy until we can create those feelings on our own inherently that we know, not just like, okay, yeah, sure, yeah, I'm inherently worthy, but we know that as a truth about ourselves. And I think that is a hard place to get to. I feel like I'm on the journey to that, but I think that I will know when I've taken on as a truth. And society does an amazing job at convincing us that we are alone, that we need this car, this house, this $150 pair of jeans to fit in, to feel loved, to be worthy, to be cool, popular, whatever it is, that we are not enough as we are. And that is wrong, like on so many levels. I mean, I think morally and ethically wrong, but like literally not true. It's not true. And especially it helps to prop up this myth that these people or this person over here has their shit together, but you don't. So like, ooh, ew, gross, uncomfy feelings. And it's a sick cycle that we get stuck in. But vulnerability and authenticity, I think, is the way out of it. And that isn't like always pretty or fun either. Like I had what I would describe as like a complete fucking meltdown basically the entire month of April, where it felt like to me every single area of my life was falling apart. And instead of like actively working to make it better, the harder I tried to fix it, I was like actively participating in its destruction. And I was like, what the fuck is going on? What am I doing? But then also feeling like I couldn't really, or like that I didn't know how, both that I couldn't and didn't know how to talk to people about it, because no one wants to come with all this like baggage of like, these are the ways in which I'm currently failing. That's hard, but it's also honest. And when I finally was able to take a step back and be like, I need to talk about this honestly, or I'm going to lose everything that I want and have in my life. And when I started having these more honest conversations, the places it took me after that were even better than it had been before, because of the honesty and vulnerability and authenticity. And it's not easy to sit down with someone and be like, I am fucking up right now. Like, this is not how I want to be having this conversation. And these actions are not reflective of who I want to be. And it's not even just like in these big ways of like, if you've made a mistake, it's like pretty huge and could destroy a relationship, but also in like smaller ways where, you know, you're just like, I'm not feeling great. I'm just having a bad day. But when there's this myth that society feeds us that we can't have bad days, we can't be less than perfect, why would we be authentic and vulnerable and share like, hey, I'm not that? Because we're told like, this is what you should be, this is what you should strive to be. So who's going to be like, hey, yeah, I'm not. I'm like, I'm here. And you're saying I should be here all the time, not just like for a day, for a minute, like 100% of the time, forever. And I'm not even there in this moment. Like, shit. Like, it's really scary, because I think it's also a human need to have community and belonging. And it feels like, if you're following this myth, it feels like being authentic and honest about your experiences when you're having a hard time will take you out of that community. But what I have found through my own personal experience, and apparently so has Dr. Brene Brown through literal scientific research, which is neat, and so many of these other people that I really deeply admire have had these conversations and done this research, written books, like all this stuff, is that when I suppressed all of that, when I was just what I thought the version of me that people wanted, that society wanted, I never felt more alone in my entire life. And I was miserable and it was horrible. And yes, there have been countless times where I've been my authentic self, and it's broken relationships. People have been like, oh my God, it's so embarrassing that you've had a problem. But like, and that's hurtful and hard, but it also reaffirms to me, like, that's not the people I want to be around. That's not my tribe. Like, if you really want to sit there and judge me and tell me I am like less than because I'm having a normal human experience, like, I do not want you in my life. So you've shown yourself the door, have a great time, and that can be painful. I'm not trying to say like, oh, so it's just like, fuck the haters. But honestly though, like, if people aren't supporting you and they're not contributing to your needs, that festers inside of you. You can feel it, you know that to be true. You can suppress it, you can deny it all you want, but in your soul and heart, you know who has your back and who does not, who genuinely loves and supports you and who genuinely does not. Because I know that when I have those people in my life and I'm like, I am afraid, and this is how I'm acting through that fear, they're like, oh my God, like, thank you. Because I also had that moment recently, multiple times, with several of my best friends. I'm like, these are my fears, and it's scary to talk about. Please don't hate me forever. And they're like, what? No, of course not. And like, the love and acceptance and community you get back is so much stronger. It really is. And like, I'm not, again, trying to say that it's easy. It is not. It is hard as hell to be human, and really hard to put your vulnerable, authentic self out there and be like, this is who I am. It's not perfect, but it never will be. Like, perfection is a lie. It is a lie. It is not real. And that is freedom for me. Like, that is because I've made this joke before, but like, honestly, I'm a recovering perfectionist. And there's nothing that's been more freeing in my life than when I've just accepted, like, I am striving towards something that doesn't actually exist if I'm trying to live in a perfectionist world. But if I'm not, if I just accept and love myself how I am and just put out there what I need to put out there, it's incredibly freeing, honestly. But would recommend, listen to the podcasts. I already forgot, oh my gosh. Listen to the podcast Super Soul by Oprah, Dr. Brene Brown episode. It's from back in 2017. There's 2 parts. And We Can Do Hard Things by Glennon Doyle and her sister, every single episode. Just wealth of information. Or if those don't resonate with you, find something that does. Like, find a way to your truth, because the community you will get on the other side is greater than anything you've ever experienced, most likely. Like, to have true, authentic connection rather than people just sort of fakely laughing at your jokes when you can tell that they don't give a shit, or just like talking about stuff you don't care about and you pretending to laugh at their jokes. It feels fake. You feel it. So my bits of advice, find the people and mentors and community that do resonate with you and that do allow you to be yourself, and know that it might not be a fun journey along the way, but the end result is better than anything that society has been telling you is what you should strive for. Like, just living in your truth is the magic. It is the magic that we need and deserve, not this fake version of, if you suppress your authenticity, you'll be liked. Probably not. Or maybe, but it's not real. It's not you. And you deserve to be loved and feel worthy and seen and heard. Like, actual, real, authentic, vulnerable you deserves that. Messy parts and all, mistakes and all, because we all have them. And if people say they don't, they are lying to you. And they're probably lying to themselves, to be honest. So find your inspiration, find your joy, find your authenticity, and find the places where you'd like to be authentic and vulnerable, and just give it a try. And see if you don't find the community that you're meant for. Thank you guys for watching. Love you all so much. Bye.